In 1985, two British climbers, Joe Simpson and Simon Yates, set out to climb the west face of Silla Grande in the Peruvian Andes, a 21,000-foot peak that had never been climbed via that route. They were young, ambitious, and traveling light. No radios, no rescue plan, just two men, some rope, and the mountain. The ascent was brutal but successful. They reached the summit in a whiteout blizzard, but summiting is only half the journey. The descent would become one of the most harrowing survival stories ever told. On the way down, Joe slipped on an ice slope and fell, shattering his right leg. The tibia drove up through his knee joint, splintering bone. He couldn't walk, he couldn't climb, and they were 19,000 feet up in a storm with night falling. Simon faced an impossible choice: abandon his friend to save himself or try to lower him down the mountain, knowing it might kill them both. He chose to try. For hours, Simon lowered Joe 300 feet at a time, digging ice anchors, tying off the rope, then repeating. It was agonizing, exhausting work. And then, in the darkness, Simon lowered Joe over an invisible cliff. Joe dangled in space, unable to climb back up, his weight pulling Simon toward the edge. Simon held on for over an hour, freezing, his hands numb, the rope cutting into his harness. Then he made a decision that would haunt him forever. He cut the rope. Joe fell 150 feet into a crevasse and disappeared into the darkness. Simon was certain he'd just killed his best friend. Joe woke at the bottom of the crevasse, alive but shattered. His leg was destroyed, his body battered, and he was deep inside a glacial crack with no way out. Above him, the walls of ice rose 100 feet, smooth and unclimbable. Below, the crevasse dropped into darkness, a void so deep he couldn't see the bottom. Most people would have given up. Joe didn't. He realized the only way out was down. He tied himself to the rope, still attached to his harness, and began lowering himself deeper into the crevasse, into the blackness, with no idea if there was a bottom or if he'd just lower himself into oblivion. It was a leap of faith driven by pure survival instinct. After 50 feet, he found it, a snow bridge, a ledge of compacted ice, and beyond it, a slope leading up toward daylight. He crawled, dragging his shattered leg inch by inch, using his ice axes to pull himself forward. It took hours. When he finally emerged onto the glacier, he was miles from base camp, alone and barely conscious. But he was alive, and he started crawling. Simon, meanwhile, had descended to base camp, convinced Joe was dead. He was racked with guilt, replaying the moment he cut the rope over and over. He'd done what he had to do. If he hadn't cut it, they both would have died. But that logic didn't ease the weight. He packed up camp, preparing to leave, to carry the news back to England that his climbing partner had died on the mountain. Then, on the third night, he heard something. A sound. Faint, distant. A voice, calling his name. He thought he was hallucinating, but it came again. He grabbed a headlamp and ran out into the darkness. And there, crawling across the moraine, a field of broken rock and ice, was Joe. He'd crawled for 3 days and 3 nights, without food, without water, through snowstorms and sub-zero temperatures, with a shattered leg covering 5 miles of the most hostile terrain on Earth. He was delirious, hypothermic, skeletal, but alive. Simon collapsed, sobbing. He thought he'd killed Joe. Instead, Joe had done the impossible. He'd crawled out of his own grave. Joe's survival defied every medical and psychological expectation. Doctors later said he should have died from shock, from infection, from exposure, from dehydration. His leg was so badly damaged it took multiple surgeries and years of rehab. He was told he'd never climb again. He climbed again. Joe and Simon wrote a book about the ordeal, Touching the Void, which became an international bestseller. It was adapted into a documentary that's considered one of the greatest survival films ever made. The story resonated because it wasn't just about physical endurance, it was about the mind's refusal to surrender. Joe said the only thing that kept him going was setting small goals. Reach that rock, make it 10 more feet, survive the next hour. He broke an impossible task into tiny, achievable pieces, and he kept moving. Simon, for his part, faced criticism from some climbers who said he should never have cut the rope, but most understood he made the only rational choice. And paradoxically, cutting the rope saved Joe's life. If Simon had been pulled off the mountain, both would have died. By cutting it, he gave Joe a chance, however slim, to survive, and Joe took it. The psychological aftermath was profound. Joe struggled with PTSD, nightmares, and survivor's guilt, not because he'd lived, but because he'd put Simon in that position. Simon struggled with the decision, even though Joe never blamed him. They remained friends, but the mountain changed them. Joe continued climbing, driven by a need to prove he could, to reclaim what the mountain had taken. Simon eventually stepped back from extreme mountaineering, haunted by how close he'd come to losing everything. But both men agree, the experience taught them what humans are capable of, when death is the only alternative. You don't know what you'll do until you're there, Joe said, until the choice is fight or die, and then you find out who you really are. Touching the Void isn't just a survival story. It's a testament to the human spirit's refusal to accept the inevitable. Joe Simpson crawled out of a crevasse, across a glacier, through a storm, with a shattered leg, because giving up wasn't an option. And in doing so, he proved that sometimes, the impossible is just hard, and hard is survivable.